Good evening, everyone. Marina's already here waiting on us. Hey, Marina. Oh, let me sit here too. Oh, you're getting big. She's the baby of the bunch, and she's just as big as she can be. Good old Marina. Okay, so tonight, another Grimm's fairy tale. And this story, as with all the Grimm's fairy tales presented on my channel, are not intended for children. Tonight I will be sharing with you a story called Clever Elsie. Clever Elsie was collected and presented by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm and is read to you this evening by Tamil Milam, assisted somewhat by Marina. So, Clever Elsie. There was once a man who had a daughter who was called Clever Elsie. And when she was grown up, her father said she must be married. And her mother said, yes, if only we could find someone that she would consent to have. At last one came from a distance, and his name was Hans. And when he proposed to her, he made it a condition that Clever Elsie should be very careful as well. Oh, said the father, she does not want for brains. No, indeed, said the mother. She can see the wind coming up the street, and she can hear the flies cough. Well, said Hans, if she does not turn out to be careful too, I will not have her. Now, when they were all seated at the table and had well eaten, the mother said, Elsie, go into the cellar and draw some beer. Then Clever Elsie took down the jug from the hook on the wall, and as she was on her way to the cellar, she rattled the lid up and down so as pass away the time. And when she got there, she took a stool and stood it in front of the cask, so that she need not stoop and make her back ache with needless trouble. Then she put the jug under the tap and turned it. And while the beer was running, in order that her eyes should not be idle, she glanced hither and thither, and finally caught sight of a pickaxe that the workmen had left sticking in the ceiling just above her head. Then Clever Elsie began to cry, for she thought, if I marry Hans, and we have a child, and it grows big, and we send it to the cellar to draw beer, that pickaxe might fall on its head and kill it. So there she sat, and she cried with all her might, lamenting the anticipated misfortune. All the while they were waiting upstairs for something to drink, and they waited in vain. At last the mistress said to the maid, go down to the cellar and see why Elsie does not come. So the maid went and found her sitting in front of the cask, crying with all her might. What are you crying for? Said the maid. Oh, dear me, answered she, how can I help but cry? If I marry Hans and we have a child and it grows big and we send it down here to draw beer, perhaps that pickaxe will fall on its head and kill it. Oh, our Elsie is clever indeed, said the maid, and directly sat down to bewail the anticipated misfortune. After a while, when the people upstairs found that the maid did not return, and they were becoming more and more thirsty, the master said to the boy, you go down to the cellar and see what Elsie and the maid are doing. The boy did so, and there he found both Clever Elsie and the maid sitting and crying together. Then he asked what was the matter. Oh, dear me, said Elsie, how can we help crying? If I marry Hans, and we have a child, and it grows big, and we send it down here for beer, the pickaxe might fall on its head and kill it. Oh, our Elsie is clever indeed, said the boy, and sitting down beside her, he began howling with a good will. Upstairs, they were all waiting for him to come back, but as he did not come, the master said to the mistress, you go down in the cellar and see what Elsie is doing. So the mistress went down and found all three in great lamentations. And when she asked the cause, then Elsie told her how the future possible child might be killed as soon as it was big enough to be sent to draw beer by the pickaxe falling on it. And then the mother at once exclaimed, "Our Elsie is clever indeed." And sitting down, she wept with the rest. Upstairs, the husband awaited a little while, but as his wife did not return, and his thirst constantly increased, he said, "I must go down to the cellar myself and see what has become of Elsie." And when he came into the cellar and he found them all sitting and weeping together, he was told that it was all owing to the child that Elsie might possibly have and the possibility of it being killed by the pickaxe, so happening to fall at just the time that the child might be sitting underneath it drawing beer. And when he heard all this, he cried, "Ooh, how clever our Elsie is!" And sitting down, he joined his tears to theirs. The intended bridegroom stayed upstairs by himself for a long time, but as nobody came, and he thought he would go himself to see what they were all about. And there he found all five lamenting and crying most pitifully, each one louder than the other. "Well, what misfortune has befallen us here?" he cried. "Oh, my dear Hans," cried Elsie, "if we were to marry, and we have a child, and it grows big, and we send it down here to draw beer, perhaps that pickaxe, which has been left sticking up there, might fall down on the child's head and kill it. Now how can we help crying at that?" "Now," said Hans, "I cannot think that greater sense than that could be wanted in any household. So as you are so clever, Elsie, I will have you as my wife." And taking her by the hand, he led her upstairs, and they had the wedding at once. A little while after they were married, Hans said to his wife, "I'm going out to work in order to get money. You go into the field and cut the corn so that we may have bread." "Very well, I will do so, dear Hans," said she, and after Hans was gone, she cooked herself a nice stew and took it with her into the field. And when she got there, she said to herself, "Now, what shall I do? Shall I reap first or eat first? All right, I will eat first." And then she ate her fill of the stew, and when she could eat no more, she said to herself, "Now, what shall I do? Shall I reap first or shall I sleep first? Oh, all right, I'll sleep first." Then she lay down in the corn and she went to sleep. And Hans got home and he waited there a long while. And Elsie did not come, so he said to himself, "Oh, my clever Elsie is so industrious that she never thinks of coming home and eating." But when evening drew near and still she did not come, Hans set out to see how much corn she had cut. But she had cut no corn at all, but was just there lying asleep in it. Then Hans made haste home and fetched a bird net with little bells all over it, and he threw it over her, and still she went on sleeping. And he ran home again and he locked himself in. And he sat down on his bench to work. At last, when it was beginning to grow dark, clever Elsie woke, and when she got up and shook herself, the bells jingled at each movement she made. Then she grew frightened, and she began to doubt whether she were really clever Elsie or not. And she said to herself, "Am I or am I not?" And not knowing what answer to make, she stood for a long while considering, and at last she thought, "I will go home to Hans and ask him if I am I or not. He is sure to know." So she ran up to the door of her house, but it was locked, and she knocked at the window and she cried, "Hans, is Elsie within?" "Yes," answered Hans, "she is in." And then she was in a greater fright than ever, crying, "Oh dear, then I am not I." She went to inquire at another door, but people hearing the jingle of the bells would not open to her, and she could get in nowhere. So she ran away beyond the village, and since then, no one has seen her. The end. Talk about an existential crisis. I'd love to hear what you think of this story. Thank you for joining me. And also Marina. Until next story time, y'all be healthy, safe, and sweet.